We're also talking about this morning. Did you know that 10% of Middlesbrough's population will be 75 or over by 2031, with 30% of the Tees Valley's population aged over 60 by that time. 30% of Tees Valley population aged over 60 by that time. So, we're asking you this morning, particularly in light of tonight's panorama, authored by Dame Joan Bakewell, who is the, obviously, Minister looking at the government's advisor on older people. We're asking you this morning, have you thought about it? How do you future-proof yourself or even prepare for your old age? And if you're there already, we'd love to hear from you. How are you managing? Is it just a case of being frail, not ill? The text 81333. Start your message with the word tease.
Let's talk to Mal Fletcher, who's live with us on the programme now, who's a social commentator. Mal, morning to you.
Good morning, Neil.
Thanks for joining us. When we talk about future-proofing your old age, people think, I've got enough in my pension pot. It's far more than that, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and I think it's wonderful that this whole issue's come up around the BBC Panorama programme tonight, Neil, because what we have here is not just an issue of housing or even saving money, it's about quality of life issues for elderly people, and we need a fundamental shift in the way we see old age. We live in a culture that really doesn't value old age very much. We talk about anti-aging techniques as if old age is not something we really can respect, and as a result I think we rob ourselves of so much the elderly could give us, and rob ourselves of an opportunity to invest in them. So in many ways I'm a big believer in the old adage that you reap what you sow, and I think in some ways if we can invest more in the elderly ourselves now, we will find in the longer term a community where age is much more celebrated and respected, and when we reach those retirement years ourselves, we may find that feeling is reciprocated.
Mal, it begs the question, how far in advance do you need to be preparing then, future-proofing for old age?
Well, I don't think there's ever a cut-off point with that. I think that we need to be thinking about the future all the time. I often tell people in audiences that if we don't invent the future, someone else's vision of our future will reinvent or reshape us. So there's always that strategic thinking that's going on. And I think if you can start when you're 25 or 30 to put a little bit away for retirement or, invest in something for the long-term future, you'll always be better off than if you start doing that at 40 or 45. But I would also add this, that we don't want a situation where people, I think, are, frightened of the future to the point where they're stashing money away, which means that not only is their quality of life diminished in the present, but so is their opportunity to sow into the community in which they live.
Mal, do you also think, coming off that subject slightly and going into kind of more of the mental, kind of psychological approach to old age, do you think it's really changed as well from generation to generation, and now you've got a lot of people looking further into the next 10 to 20 years with a much fresher, very different approach to basically, the years ahead as such?
Well, Diana, I think we still have a bit of a problem with things like a culture of celebrity that worships youthfulness. We have the marketing of these anti-aging techniques that I mentioned. But I think as more of us, particularly we baby boomers, approach that magic age of 65, we do start to think differently about old age because we know we will be there very soon. And I, for one, would like to see a version perhaps of the National Citizenship Service that Mr Cameron's been talking about, tailored for the elderly, not just to provide services for them, but to provide opportunities for them to sow back into the community. I think that as we approach old age, our generation now is moving that way very quickly. We need to find ways to keep giving back to the community, mentoring, offering coaching, for example, in schools, craft work. There's all sorts of things that very old people can do to make a contribution.
Mal, we have our guest in the studio this morning, Father Paul Farrow, who's a youth chaplain from St Thomas Moores in Middlesbrough, and also Emma Beach joins us as well this morning. Hi, Emma.
Hello.
Nice to see you. She's director of Dance Factory North East Limited. They run workshops for children aged between 2 and 18 in Easterside. Emma, are you future-proofing? Are you ready for your old age? Not just pension-wise, are you kind of thinking, how will life adapt when I'm older?
I'm a very kind of live for the moment person, I'm afraid. So, no. Every now and again I'll have like one day a week where I have a bit of a panic and go, oh no, maybe I should be like putting in some money into this or whatnot. But Not at the moment. I mean, I'm self-employed, so everything that I'm kind of doing at the moment is very much when the money comes in, it's used for what it's used for.
Mal, before you give Father John some advice, give our guest Emma some advice. What should she be doing now in her 20s?
Well, Emma, at least you're honest about it, and that's a big start. I think that you've actually touched, Emma, on something that's even bigger, which is the housing issue in our country, which I think does prevent many people from saving for retirement. You know, so much is spent, soaked up by mortgages and rental costs, largely because we haven't given a lot of thought to more creative ways of planning our towns, our housing developments. Costs of mortgages are so high. You know, rental in this country is, let's be honest, pretty much stacked in favour of the landlord, so it's not a very cost-effective way of living for most people. And all of that means we do tend to live pretty ad hoc when it comes to our finances, because mortgage is, or housing cost is, the central plank, really, in our whole financial strategy for most of us. So if we could get some government help to sort that out, I think we would have a much better shot at putting money aside for the future.
Father Paul Farrer, have you got any thoughts on what you're hearing? Because you must see it quite a lot within your parishioners as well.
I mean, I think I'm lucky because we don't retire until we're 75. I'm just sitting here thinking maybe that's
going to be 85 under the new coalition government.
I used to feel quite hard done by, but now the government keeps up in the retirement age, it's not quite so bad. But what we see, I think what we see in the church is probably what we're seeing in society as well now, which is that there are less young people. They're not less committed, they're not going elsewhere, there are just less of us. The birth rate has fallen, and the reality is that there are more older people who are living longer, and hallelujah for that. That's good, isn't it? But there are less of us to look after them.
If you've got the health and you've got the financial backing, it's all right saying you're living longer, and that has to be a good thing as long as you've got the support around you, you know?
But you see, that's the thing that I think has to change. And I've been cynical about speed cameras, I've been cynical about the big society now. I think the government's saying to us, right, we the politicians have messed up. Here's a list of things we've messed up, like the health service or your post office or whatever, and we haven't got any money to do it anymore, so now you can do it without any money. That's what I think that, and actually what we need, I think that would be really good. I think it'd work really well if we had a change, we were able to foster a change in people's attitudes, and the attitude is, I think we're only talking about this today because the rest of us who are now earning are actually saying, well, I need to put my money away for me and mine, rather than saying, what can I do to support the rest of society?
Mal Fletcher's on the line as well as social commentator. Mal, as you're listening to that, was something Paul mentioned just then, less of us to look after them. There is a sense here of, has there been a failing in community in terms of a generation coming through who were probably given a really good start, for the majority, I'd hope to think, by our parents, to be there for them in the latter years as well, even if you've got your own young family. Mal, is there something in that?
Yes, I think there probably is, and I think Father Paul would probably agree that some of the things in the past that have added to social fabric and traditionally bonded a community together are not in place in many areas of the UK now. Local sporting events, children's clubs, youth clubs, for many people, religious activities, all of these gave us a sense of responsibility for and to each other. And the fact that they now play less prominent role in our lives means that in many ways some of us feel powerless to address social problems except through the ballot box, through the political process. And we end up with a situation where we and some of the politicians we elect actually believe that only politics can reshape society for the good. And that simply isn't the case. I think the very best governments are those that don't try to do everything. They set some things up, they facilitate, they articulate a vision, but they also allow us in the local communities, groups that already are doing great things for the elderly, to get on with the job without red tape, without overbearing, overbloated bureaucracy and so on.
Mel, should more responsibility be put on our own shoulders? Should we be more responsible for ourselves, or is it a case of we've got a big society we keep hearing about? Should we have the big pension society as well, where we're looking after each other? Is that part of this?
Well, I don't think caring for one another is necessarily measured just in the paying of taxes for pensions.
Of course not.
I think that there are organisations now, for example, that are doing great work in enlisting and releasing volunteers to work with the aged, organising walks, health education programs, home hospital visits, even what they call dinner partnerships for people who are living in care facilities and eating alone. These are such simple things, but with a little bit of foresight on our part, I think we can all do a little bit more to make life easier for the elderly, but also release the elderly to make a contribution back into society.
I think that's. I'm just thinking about my mum and dad. They look after the old guy that lives next door to them.
Right, yeah.
And they always, whenever they're cooking, they take a meal across and all of the rest of it. The only reason I'm thinking about it is because I cooked the dinner on Sunday.
You don't want to
took
feel like
some across, and they said it was the best she'd ever cooked.
Mel, do you understand why people sometimes don't interfere? You don't want to feel as if like they're intruding on other people's lives. There's that to a certain extent, isn't it?
Yes, there is, and we are, let's face it, in Britain, we value privacy. We respect other people's privacy. But I think there is a case to be made, especially in the age of hyper-networking online. Sometimes it's easier, I think, to make connections through cyberspace than it is face-to-face. And that's where at least the discussion about, quote, big society can engender something good. It can at least get us talking again and perhaps moving again in the direction of taking more...
the thing is, I agree, but I think the big thing is that, like, my mum and dad know their next door neighbour's name, and I don't know my next door neighbour's name. I know plenty of people in cyberspace.
It's a generation thing.
I think so. You know. I mean, the sort of payoff of the story of my mum and dad cooking the old fella next door their dinner is mum and dad are both in the 70s. And they look after the old man next door.
We're going to have to leave it there. Mal Fletcher, thank you very much for your time this morning. Mal Fletcher, who's a social commentator. We'd love to still hear your thoughts just before we get to the news on how do you future-proof yourself for old age. The text 81333. Start your message with the word tease.